What's up, Internet? Welcome to Dyslexia Talks with Rick and Ellie. Today, Ellie, I think our topic should be writing. The 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 I just can't think of any other word but torture. The torture
Yes.
that writing is for dyslexics. I think that this is a topic that all of us dyslexics, fellow dyslexics around the globe, can probably have a big party or conference about.
Mhm.
Which we
Mhm.
should do, by the way. That would be fun. Get together and talk about the torture that is writing if you're dyslexic.
Just commiserate.
Yes, that would be a fun commiserating party. So
Yeah.
that said, uh, the thing that's difficult for me still as a dyslexic in writing is, and we were chatting about this earlier, is the effort it takes to do it compared to
Mhm.
quote unquote typical brain people who right who don't
Mhm.
have dyslexia. It's a form of like torture because it takes so much time and effort to write something. And I was thinking about that today, and I wanted to ask you about that. Is if you've had ask you about that, but then ask if you had a similar shared experience to me as to me. One of the things that I have to do before I write is everything has to be lined up. Like I have to be awake, have coffee. I can't have other distractions. I have to have done a copious amounts of research and reading. I have to feel confident that what I'm saying is important.
Mhm. Mhm.
And
Yeah, I feel
if I
like
don't have those
okay.
things, if I don't have those things lined up, I can't do it. It won't work. And there's probably
Yep.
more things.
Yeah.
How about you?
No, I totally get that. I feel like well, I have to have my setup. I have to have like gone for a run. I need my playlist. I would always be on the silent floor of the library when I was
Mm-hmm.
in college. I just needed absolute silence. And then also, yeah, I would
Mm-hmm.
like everything would have to be lined up. I would have to have like an normally my outlines for papers were almost as long as my actual essays because I just had to get it all down
Mm-hmm.
on paper and like have a very clear
Mm-hmm.
lineup of what I was going to be writing in order for me to actually dive in and start like caring about
Mm-hmm.
grammar and like putting it into paragraphs and like thinking
Yeah.
like that because like that kind of thinking took so much energy that I had to have all the actual material just
Yeah.
ready before I could do
Yeah.
that. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
is some of this, did you have this struggle? So one of the things that happened to me, or it happens to me every single time. So, but the moment in my life where it was the most apparent was when I was writing my thesis paper for my MFA in graduate school. And I had all my ideas. I had it all. I could explain it to you upside down and sideways. But as soon as I sat down to write it, the words that I was using all of a sudden didn't make any sense to me. Like it was like I'd put the words down and be like, what the frick? That's not what I want to say. And I would get so frustrated with myself because I could tell you exactly what I was going to say. And people were like, that
Hmm.
sounds great. You should write that. And then I would write it down and be like, that's wrong. That's not
Yep.
what I want to say. Like I couldn't find the equivalent words to put on the paper for it to make sense to what I could explain to you verbally. So I would get
Yeah.
frustrated. I'd be in this like cycle of vortex of hell spiraling down because I could communicate what I wanted to say. My ideas were sound, but as soon as I tried to write a paragraph or a page about them,
Hmm.
I would look at it and go, this is all wrong. And there was no way out because it was
Yeah.
always
No, I.
wrong. The
Yeah.
words always seemed wrong to me.
Yeah. It's also
Has
it's
that
like
happened to you?
when you start having those like big, complex, like higher level,
Yeah.
like not assignments, but like pieces of writing that you have to do. I
Yeah.
totally relate. I had like weirdly my sophomore year, I had like the biggest, most involved essay that I had to do for college was like a 25-page research paper. I
Mm-hmm.
did a discourse analysis, which is like, very like intellectual, and there's not a lot of like nothing is really based in hard facts. It's all these like very conceptual ideas about like how
Mm-hmm.
people talk about certain things and what perceptions that creates, and like, it's like this leads to this, leads to this, leads to this. um
Mm-hmm.
type of thinking.
Mm-hmm.
And oh God, I like it was awful. I could not write it for so long. And I would write it and then rewrite it. I remember scrapping my
Mm-hmm.
entire lit review, which was huge. Like it was me analyzing like 15 different academic papers. And I
Mm-hmm.
scrapped it all because I was like, this nothing makes sense. This doesn't make sense. This isn't what I need. I gotta redo it.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
I just
No, it just that it doesn't make sense, right? Like it's like you start to, but what the thing that doesn't make sense is when you start to when you have to formulate words that go in a that go on a piece of paper. That seems where it breaks down for me. I could draw you a picture of it. I could explain it to you. I could go get the
mhm,
books and show you what I meant. But
mhm.
the act of writing it in a sentences and paragraphs
It's
seems to
not
be the
happening.
not. It doesn't seem to. Well, okay, the way that I explain it now, I didn't have this language before, is that it's a complex idea, and I didn't know until I read the book Proust and the Squid, which we'll talk about in a little bit. Um, was that my brain is noticing other things that aren't capable of being words, sounds, colors, shapes, um, other things that were really important to the ideas. They were
Mhm.
spatial things and conceptual things that are not words. And I didn't know that at the time when I was writing my thesis paper. That what I was frustrated about was that I was trying to communicate in words something that cannot be communicated in words
Because you were talking about
because of
art,
the way
right?
that my brain is wired.
Yeah. Yeah. That makes a lot of sense. Yeah.
I didn't
I
know
didn't
that
have
that was the
that.
problem.
Yeah. But like, yeah, it's so hard. I mean, especially like, I guess we'll get more into this in the future, but like how a dyslexic brain processes things is so
Mm-hmm.
completely different,
Mm-hmm.
like, than a normal brain. So
Yep.
how can you link how you're intaking information
Yep.
to
Yep.
another part of your brain
Yeah.
when you were never
Yes.
taught how to do, right? Like
Yeah.
you just had to adapt your whole life.
No.
Yeah.
You just
Yeah.
exactly. And I think for me, the reason why I'm pinpointing my thesis papers, it was something I really cared about. I didn't
Yeah.
really give it. I never gave. Okay, I had a lot of anxiety around it, but I didn't care about the assignments teachers were giving me. I could care less. But this is something that I really cared about, right? This is my graduate degree in art, and I had some ideas that I thought were interesting, and I couldn't get in. It was torture because it was something I cared about.
Yeah.
Um, so maybe this is a good time to bring up the brain scan image of a
Mhm.
typical reader and a dyslexic reader.
Mhm.
So the gold color is a typical reader, and the light blue, is a dyslexic reader. And when I saw this, Ellie, I felt freedom. I was like, oh, I see. A dyslexic brain is using way more of another hemisphere to read
Mhm.
and to write.
Mhm.
And I was like, oh, that explains everything because so much more is
Yeah.
going on. And that's why,
Yeah.
because there's so much more going on in the brain, it's harder to formulate just really simple words that other people just think is simple, like a sky means sky, but sky to me means blue. And sometimes it's red blue. And sometimes the sky has wind in it. Sometimes the sky is moving.
Yeah.
So it's like, how do you say that? Like, I want to say all of it. And so when I
Yeah.
saw the brain
No.
scan, I realized that, oh, I see. There's more going on. And that's why it's hard for a dyslexic to describe in words when you're going to write what you're going to write, because there's actually
Mhm.
more being
Mhm.
fired, more to process.
Mhm.
How about you?
Mhm.
This was a liberating image for me. What was your first response when you saw this brain scan?
I was just like, "Oh, it clicks." Like I feel like I have always, I mean, also just using more of the brain, like when I read, it's always been exhausting. Like if I'm tired, I
Mm-hmm.
cannot read.
Yes.
That'll
Mm-hmm.
just knock me right
Mm-hmm.
out. Same goes for writing. Like I was not somebody who could
Yep.
pull an all-nighter essay. Like it just wouldn't
No.
happen.
No.
Um, like that was really enlightening. But I also feel like because, I've always found that like I can take multiple different meanings from
Mm-hmm.
like I don't know, a paragraph or something that needs to be analyzed in like another
Mm-hmm.
person's literature.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and like I can extract a lot of meaning and like
Mm-hmm.
um a lot of
Mm-hmm.
significance. And it's definitely played well into like a lot of papers because you know you're always taking quotes for papers and being like, well, this is what this means and this supports my argument, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I
Mm-hmm.
feel like I
Mm-hmm.
can so easily do that because yeah, I can just like take
And you can
multiple
see,
different
because you
kinds of
can see the all the different angles of meaning. You
yeah.
can come at
Yeah.
it from the different levels of meaning. That's probably why you're
Mhm.
interested in debate too, right? Like, because you could
Yeah.
pull
Yeah.
from all these areas, right?
Yeah.
And make
And
sense
just
of
spin
them.
it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Mhm. Mhm.
Yeah. No,
Yeah.
I think no, I so that's a okay, so we can talk about reading too. That's going to be that could be its own episode too, but I think we should, because reading and writing are connected. So one of the other
Yeah.
things that has been really pivotal for me in my sanity is reading Proust and the Squid, and by Marianne Wolfe. This book changed my life because she explained, so she basically said something to me that's so obvious that I didn't know, which is that reading, writing is a cultural phenomenon. Cultures create reading and writing, and then demand that other
Mhm.
people, all the other people in the culture, read and write. And I was like,
Mhm.
oh, that explains the horror of it all, right? Because if you don't fit in, if your brain isn't wired to do what the
Yeah.
culture wants, you are immediately counterculture, right? You
Yeah.
don't fit in into your culture, and that explains the terror and the anxiety around it, because you're not able to conform at all
Yeah.
ever, because you're
No.
because your brain's wired different. I was
You
like,
it's
wait,
not just not being able
cultures
to
invented
conform.
writing.
You're like yeah, you're deemed a failure. Like
Yeah,
you
yeah,
are deemed
exactly. You're deemed
inconsequential.
inadequate. Inadequate.
Yeah.
Yes,
Yeah,
it's
no. And
and
also
then
how
that has an impact on
yeah.
you, on your young person, right? It has a big impact on you.
Mhm. Mhm.
Do you
Also
have
like
any?
when
So go ahead.
I was just gonna say, like, teaching, how we teach how to read is also a cultural phenomenon, right? Like,
Yep.
you don't
Yeah.
necessarily have to teach people how to read in one certain way,
Yeah.
yet in the US, everybody learns how to read the same way,
Yeah.
unless you have
They
to get
do.
chucked to special ed,
And
which also sucks.
she mentions that in Proust and the Squid, that we're doing it all wrong. All the research
Mm-hmm.
shows that we're
Mm-hmm.
doing it all wrong. So we don't need to be doing this way, but we're still doing it this way. Um,
Yeah.
so the other thing okay, so for me, conceptually thinking about this, the reason why I found so much
Yeah.
relief around that is that, oh, reading and writing is a fiction. It's fiction. It's an invention by other human beings. So therefore, I don't
Mm-hmm.
have to believe in it if I don't want to. I realized, but I was 50 years old, 49 years old. Like, oh, human beings invented this, so it doesn't mean anything. It doesn't mean anything, and yet the whole
The
culture
concept.
is thinks that it does.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But when I discovered that when I gave myself permission to go, oh, it's a cultural fabrication created by cultures, by people, then forced upon other people, I realized
Mm-hmm.
I didn't have to believe in it. It's like a
Mm-hmm.
religion, and I didn't need to
Yeah,
believe in it,
it
because
is.
I discovered I can be highly successful and productive and have a lot of joy and fun in life just doing what a dyslexic does.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I
Yeah.
didn't need to conform. I guess what happened is, like, I dropped at 49 years old when I read this book. I dropped all the baggage of having to conform to reading and writing.
Yeah.
And I
Yeah.
was like, it was a freedom. There was a freedom in that I didn't know I needed. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I didn't know I needed that. And that's how I was
Yeah.
telling you, I teared up when I like bawled when I read this book, because all the anxiety and the shame and this this idea that there was something wrong with me, that not I never felt like I never felt like a failure, but I was told I was
Mm-hmm.
failing. I never felt
Which is
like a
such an awful
failure.
thing to hear, especially when you don't believe
Yeah,
it. I like it's almost worse when you don't believe
yeah,
it because you're like, wait,
yeah,
no.
yeah. I was like,
Yeah.
I don't feel like a failure.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
So I didn't realize that. So that's what something else I wanted to talk about was the early for me, my early trauma around dyslexia
Mhm.
was in school, as everybody, you don't discover the
Yeah.
trauma till you go to school and you're not normal.
Yeah.
But before
Yeah.
school, you're a happy, smart kid. And then
Yeah.
you go to
No,
school
everybody
and you're
thinks
an
you're bright.
unhappy, and people are telling you're not smart anymore because you can't read and
Yeah.
write the way that other people are reading and writing. So for me, the my work around that was just to be um to do good at other things, right? Like
Mhm.
I was good socially. Like we talked about this in our first episode, right? Like just like you, I can read a room, I can figure out what's going on, I can figure what the pecking order is, right? And I would just
Mhm.
have fun with that, and I would have success at that immediately, or on the playground, or with my friends, or um, I would find the places where I could, succeed. But for me, the first trauma around reading and the way they teach reading in school was we had these goofball things where in first grade where we had to read sentences, and then I don't forget we had to read them out loud. Yeah, we had to read them out loud to the teacher, or we had to rewrite them. I don't know, it was a combination of goofy things. But you'd read a
Yeah.
sentence and be like, Chuck and Susie went to the store and bought apples, but instead of the word apples, it would be an image of an apple.
That's
And I would be like, and
awful.
now I know, and I would get to the apple part and I would stop and they would think something's wrong with me. But I stopped because I was like really concentrating. As we both know now, it takes a lot of effort to read.
Yeah.
I would stop and be like, why is there an apple here? There should be a word here. And then I'd get in trouble because guess what? I was seen as a troublemaker because I was going,
Yeah.
there's an apple here and not a word. You're freaking me out. Like, and I get in trouble. I got in trouble, and I was
Yeah.
seen as a troublemaker with the teacher because I would question the picture.
Yeah.
But I
That's
wasn't questioning it
crazy.
because I was precocious. I was questioning it because my brain was freaking out.
Yeah. You were honestly
So how
questioning
about
it.
you?
You didn't understand.
What do you have any
Oh
early
God.
experiences that you?
Yeah, I mean, I was thrown in special ed in first grade. It was like an
Oh,
hour a day of tutoring, which sucked, but it was also nice because you were with other people who couldn't read, right? So that was when I was like pretty relaxed, but I
yeah,
remember like in first grade we would have like reading groups, and
yeah,
so I would
yeah.
so there'd be like all my friends would be off in their own little reading group, right? And they weren't
Mm-hmm.
supervised by a teacher. They would just read their like cool, interesting books. And then I'd be
Yeah.
with my first grade teacher who also just like sucked. Like she was just mean. Um, and then she would like try to get me to learn how to read,
Really.
and it was she was just like banging up against a wall. Like I couldn't.
Yeah.
The way she was trying to teach, it was just not happening. I felt like such an idiot because it was like the most basic books, right? Like I knew
Yeah.
they were basic as
Yeah.
hell, but I still couldn't
Yeah.
fucking read them.
You're like, and,
um,
and so she was putting a lot of effort in and getting nowhere, and she was losing her mind.
yeah, no, she was losing her mind. I was losing my
Mm-hmm.
mind. It was
Yep.
bad. I felt so embarrassed, and yeah,
Yep.
it was not good. Yeah,
So,
there's so
okay,
many
the
different
embarrassing
things.
part, I think what's one of the things that's really interesting, I think, about our two stories is your parents were highly involved in
Yeah.
supporting you around being
Mhm.
dyslexic, and in the where like the time when I grew up, that wasn't the case. I didn't have a support structure. Was that helpful? Um,
Super.
like I didn't have any of that, like support structures. I didn't go to the remedial reading class, like you know what I mean. So like
Yeah.
for me, I was just completely in the dark about it. But
Yeah.
I was just curious if that was helpful in looking back on it.
No. For sure, having a word for it, like being like, "Oh, I'm
Yeah.
dyslexic. I'm not stupid. I
Yep.
have a different brain." And like my parents
Yep.
always they were really good because they always contextualized it as like, you're not less than, you just have a different brain. You're so smart in other ways. And
Yes.
like like they would always reassure me, but I would still like come home and like cry and be like, I'm a fucking idiot. Like or not, but I'm an
Oh, I
idiot.
know.
I was 8.
Yeah.
But like yeah, it was, yeah,
Yeah.
no, but they were always super supportive, and I wasn't like labeled. I mean, also I feel like there's a difference between boys and girls. You know, I feel like boys are more likely to be labeled troublemakers, but um,
Interesting.
like
Yeah.
yeah, I
Why do you
was.
think that's the case? I mean, that's a different topic maybe, but isn't that funny? Yeah, I
I
was
think it.
always labeled troublemaker. What were you labeled?
Yeah, I
You
was
were never,
labeled
did you ever
like.
get called out as a troublemaker?
No, I was like
No?
I was always a quiet kid. Like I didn't like to draw attention to myself.
Okay.
Which I think had a lot to do with I feel like there were so many times in school when I just wanted to be invisible because I was so embarrassed.
Yes.
And like I think that
Yeah.
manifested also and like I'm already like naturally a shy person.
Mm-hmm.
But it
Mm-hmm.
definitely like manifested in being very quiet in school and like not wanting to be called at all
Yeah.
ever.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, yeah,
No, it's and
but
that's an interesting idea that young boys are labeled troublemakers more than young women, young girls. Like that's
hmm
kind of interesting, but that's a
hmm
different cultural problem.
yeah. Well, and
um,
it's also interesting. Or I was gonna like on top of that, like apparently, or I read a study, and like a large percentage of the prison population, which you know is largely black
hmm
men, is
hmm
also dyslexic. And I think that makes so much
Amazing.
sense because it's like
Yeah.
these frustrated kids who are in school and they feel smart,
Yeah.
you know, and you start acting out. And if you're a black boy, you are going to get punished
Yeah.
more in school for that, right? And
Yes,
it just
you will.
snowballs through your entire school career. And like
Yeah,
eventually
because
you commit
dyslexic
crime.
is presenting as counter, right? You're kind of
Yeah,
countering the teacher or kind of out in a weird way, you're outwitting them by saying, no, there's another way to do it. Right?
exactly.
Just by
Yeah,
default, you're like, oh, I did it this way. And they're like, oh, I don't know how to deal with you. So you're a troublemaker
yeah, yeah,
in
exactly.
both your written communication and your verbal communication. Yeah, I know
Mm-hmm.
that's really interesting. Now, you also
Yeah.
wrote a big paper on this, on dyslexia.
Mm-hmm.
So did that in any way help relieve any of the anxiety of being dyslexic in our culture that is high, as we know, highly focused on not being dyslexic?
Yeah, for sure. I feel like it gave me hope for my future. I feel like when you are in school and when you are starting your
Mm-hmm.
career, you know, being dyslexia is still a detriment, but as soon as you get into like a leadership position or you just like, you know, have enough self-assuredness that you are like, oh yeah, I'm
Yeah.
going to start and do my, you know, be an entrepreneur or like become an artist,
Mm-hmm.
then it really is beneficial and like the strengths start to show. So I was like,
Yeah.
okay, like there's a future
Yeah.
out there. There's so many entrepreneurs and so many, you know, successful people who are also
Yes.
dyslexic. And I
That's
think
one of the
it
things.
definitely like
No,
led
that's
me
one
to
of the
trust
things
my
that
gut.
she.
Or what were we gonna
Oh,
say?
okay. So you just started to trust yourself.
Yeah,
Sorry, I know
yeah,
the
yeah,
delays, the latency, or whatever they call it.
yeah.
Well,
It's
that's the
not
one thing
ideal.
that she says, that Marianne Wolf says in the book, is that she started to track dyslexics in fields that are highly successful in different fields. There was so many
hmm
dyslexics that she stopped tracking dyslexics and just tracked what field they were in. And guess what it is? It's like radiology. It's all pattern recognition. Like lawyers,
Oh, interesting.
artists, politicians, people who have to compile a lot of information. So that, I think that
hmm
that's, we
hmm
have to interview her sometime, because that's
Yeah,
interesting, right? That dyslexics find their place eventually.
yeah, yeah,
And
yeah. No,
but it's
I
not
it
school,
totally
but
makes
we're in
sense.
school forever. So it's torture for 21 years.
Right, right. It was I feel such a like sense of relief now that I'm out of school. And I also do think that like well like for the sake of the podcast, my job now is a climbing arborist and I'm outside all day doing super physical stuff. And I think in a
Yeah.
lot of ways like I just needed a mental break from feeling like
Yes.
inadequate and feeling like I constantly have to prove myself and I
Yes.
know I'm good at hard physical labor.
So you're like, I'm going to do
So like
that to take a
great.
break.
Yeah. Yeah.
I
Like
love
this
it.
is
I'm
not
like, I'm
permanent,
going to do a really
but
hard job that's physical, so I got a break from what I just did for 20
yeah, that
years.
on paper it looks brutal and hellish, but for me it's a break.
Oh, that is
Yeah.
awesome. Well,
Yeah.
yeah. So yeah, I think that's a good point. So my full disclosure for our dyslexic talks is I teach at a university, so I relive the hell every day, and I don't know why
I
I
don't know
do
why you
it.
did
I got to stop, I think. Now, what's
that.
happened is I've formed relationships with people, and I work collaboratively with people. And so then over time, people trust me, and it doesn't really matter that I'm dyslexic. Like
Hmm.
I've found people who compliment my weakness around dyslexia, who can tolerate it or see it as
Hmm.
an advantage. Um, but I definitely, my major and my graduate degree is in art. So I definitely I'm predisposed to doing art. I feel the most at home making art because you can explore anything you want and it's not tied to the rules of language. And it turns out the
Yeah.
rules of language are arbitrary, that people just
Yeah.
invented and they just decided right or wrong, right? Like, because
Yeah.
it worked for them. But so for me, yeah, I definitely lean towards the physical. I think when I was younger, and if I had more time, I would do more of this. But climbing was definitely
Hmm.
was my outlet from the stress of school and
Hmm.
being in the school, because when you're climbing, you get to use your dyslexic superpowers at every moment.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I didn't know
Yeah,
this,
for sure.
Ellie, because you're an arborist and you're doing similar things as a
Hmm.
climber. One of the things
Hmm.
that I didn't know until looking back on it right now is that because I was dyslexic, I picked up all the knots and all the techniques instantaneously. I never
Yeah.
had any issue. Like, oh, okay, that's how you tie a figure eight. That's how you tell a bowline. I can visually see it instantly and make it happen
Yeah.
because it's spatial. But other people like
Yeah.
fumble around with it and they can't figure it out.
Yeah. No, it was,
Or,
I was so,
the,
we had like knots tests, for
yeah,
as you become, like when I was just hired, we did like they like gave us a whole
mm-hmm,
list of knots and they're like, learn it and we're gonna test you on it. And I was like,
yep,
oh no, like shoot, like I know figure eight and that's it. And
yeah,
so but yeah, it was so easy because it takes
yep,
visualizing something. I also like rotating in
yes,
space because you have to tie those knots in different orientations. And I've always been really
exactly,
good at that. I've always been able to like,
yeah,
okay, like I can draw this from this angle, but I can also visualize it even if I'm looking at it from this angle
yeah,
from the bottom,
yeah,
which I realized not
yeah.
everybody can do. It took me a while.
No, they can't. Like I was um I've been teaching one of Forrest's friends how to make anchors for ice climbing.
Mm-hmm.
And making anchors, I'm really good at making anchors. I love it. It's one of the most creative acts you can do to be safe, right? Like I'm going to make an anchor so that you don't die. And to me, that's
Yeah.
like I'm highly motivated to make it good, but also I have fun with it. So like but I realize other people have a hard time with the spatial geometry of equalizing anchors quickly. I can equalize an anchor almost perfectly every time. I mean, every once in a while I mess up, but it's just because I was being lazy or
Yeah.
something, right? Like it wasn't because I was just I was rushing it or something. But
Yeah.
I can equalize anchors in lots of different situations, like off trees, off ice screws, off bolts, off trad gear. You just go down the list,
Mm-hmm.
and I have the most fun figuring that out. But I didn't realize that terrifies normal people, right? Like you're just like
Yeah.
because they want a standardized system, because that's where the superpower comes in.
Mm-hmm.
Traditional brain wired people around reading and writing are really good at that. But when you put them in an environment where there's more complexity, they want a standardized system. But when you're rock climbing or climbing a tree, every
You
tree's
can't.
different, every rock's different. So you have to adapt the
Yeah.
concept. You have to
To
adapt the
that tree.
concept, not the recipe.
Yeah. Yep. No, I totally feel
Yeah.
that. I feel like a lot of, they're always reassuring me, like, oh, like, it's super nerve-wracking at first, but like, you just have to learn to like figure stuff out and adapt and like,
Yeah.
trust your gear,
Yeah.
blah, blah, blah. But I'm like, I trust my gear. And like, I also know, like, I have a good idea of how to like triangulate no matter where
Yeah.
I am in a tree. And I've
Yep.
only been up 5 trees, but like I'm like I already feel like I have a good grasp
Yep.
of like, okay, if my anchor is here, then my buck strap needs to probably be around here. Oh, there's the branch. That's where it needs to go. Like,
Yeah. Yeah.
and then I'm stable, you know? And it's
Yep.
like, yeah, it's interesting. It's really interesting
It
to
is
like
interesting.
that I don't freak out in those situations because I see a lot of people, newer
Well, that's where
climbers,
your brain
freaking out.
comes in handy. The way that
Yeah.
you think and spatialize things, like you were talking about in our last episode about being able to remember markers, right? It's that same
Mhm.
ability, but
Mhm.
put into
Yeah.
it being 50 feet up in a tree. Okay, so looping back to writing, um, one of the things that I don't want us to not talk about was that
Mhm.
the other thing that's really weird for me though with writing is that if I write creatively, I don't have the problem that I have writing for somebody else. So when I write
Mhm.
creatively, something weird happens. And I wanted to ask you if this is similar for you. It just comes to me. So for example, I wrote a book about Madison. You'll have to read. Did I ever send it to you?
No.
The book
I
about
want to
I
read
wrote a
it.
book. I wrote a novel called Room 109 based on my experiences in Madison, Wisconsin.
That's so funny.
And here's what happened. It's the classic story that you hear from authors who write fiction. These
Mhm.
characters showed up and just told me what to say. And when the
Crazy.
characters showed up and told me what to say, I didn't have any of that angst that I described to you around my thesis paper.
Yeah.
It was weird. And then any crazy words that would show up, I didn't care. I would go and fix them later. There was no angst. There
Yeah.
was none of the torture. Characters would just show
Mhm.
up and tell me what to say, and I would just say it. And because I felt free when I was being creative. But when I'm asked to write conceptually or about other people's ideas, I can connect the dot. I could give you a lecture on it on the on the fly, no preparation, no problem, knock it out of the park. But if you ask me to write it down or
No,
die, I would
not
die.
happen.
So I didn't know if you
Yeah.
had that experience writing creatively.
I think I mean like I when I write poetry, I yeah, the
Yeah,
anxiety just falls away because you're using those like
yeah,
base components of written language, but there's no rules
yeah,
anymore, right? Like the rules are gone.
exactly.
Um
Yes, it's
and
just like
like
painting
yeah,
then.
no, I love writing poetry, shitty
See,
poetry, but I it's there.
but it,
And
but you,
then
but
yeah,
the point is the anxiety goes away.
yeah, it's gone. It's gone. Yeah.
Yeah, isn't
Yeah.
that weird?
And
Do you
yeah,
think
it's
it's
just like
because is that because of
oh, I
school?
don't I was gonna yeah, I think it's because of school. I think academic writing is so constrictive, right? Like how you
Yes,
cite
it
things
is.
has to be so precise. How you use fucking commas has
Yeah,
to be so perfect.
yeah.
Why can't I just use commas when I feel like I need a comma? I don't understand. Like
It's just somebody
um
else's rules that we're being told to follow.
yes. And like you would still understand what I was saying, you know? Like why do
Yeah,
I have to follow
exactly,
these rules when
exactly,
you would still
exactly.
understand the ideas, right?
Yep,
And like the
yep.
idea of like language, written words sounding right or wrong, you know, like, oh, that's like really chunky writing. Oh, that's like, you know, like there's all these adjectives to
Yeah,
describe writing,
yeah,
like it doesn't flow, you know? Like it's
yep.
all constructs, right? Like it's just how you're
Yeah,
reading it, which
I
could be
know.
changed. Yeah, yeah.
The yeah, I think the and well, we could probably bring up the quote, Steve, if you want. I think that this quote from this race car driver, I don't remember his name, Jackie Stewart, really resonates with me because this goes back to your point with men in prison, right? Is that he said no? He says here, he won 27 Grand Prix, was knighted the Prince by Prince Charles, had one of the world's most successful racing careers before he retired. He was also dyslexic. Recently, he concluded concluded a speech at an international scientific conference on dyslexia by saying, "You will never understand what it feels to be dyslexic. No matter how long you have worked in this area, no matter if your own children are dyslexic, you will never understand what it feels like to be humiliated your entire childhood and taught every day to believe that you will never succeed at anything."
Yes.
I was like,
Yeah.
wow, that he expressed exactly what happens.
No, and I
And
totally feel it. And I feel like I have based my whole entire life off that feeling. Because now I
yes.
associate working really hard and putting myself through a lot of mental turmoil with doing the right
hmm
thing and like success, right? Like I took a lot of art classes in college, but they felt
Yep.
easy. They felt too easy.
Yep.
And because of that, I felt like I shouldn't be doing it. It wasn't the right thing to do for my
Yes.
career.
Yes. Yes.
And so I forced myself to keep doing international studies, which was brutal and hard and
Yep.
put me through so much turmoil, but it felt right
Yep.
because of all of that.
Is that because you wanted to figure it out? I think that
I think I was trying to
I have the
prove
same
something.
exact experience. No, no,
Yeah.
I think it's prove, and you're like stubborn. I'm stubborn too, and I want to figure it out. I'm going to figure this out. Someday I'm going
Yeah.
to figure this
Yeah.
out. But it wasn't until I saw the brain scan and I
No.
realized I'm never going to
No.
figure it
No. We're fucked. No, it's not happening.
out. No, I that's why
Yeah.
I've stayed in school my whole life, Ellie,
God, you
right?
trapped yourself.
Well, I'm lucky, right? Because I teach art, and
No, you got it
but
good.
and you know what's funny
You're
is
good.
what you just described. I see a lot from
Mhm.
students. The art comes too
Mhm.
easy, and they're suspect of that. I'm like, well, don't be suspect of
Yeah.
that. That's your talent. Don't be suspect of
Yeah.
that. But that's because the school system is set up, or the culture has set up a structure in which you should be suspect of something that comes easy to you. It's
Mhm.
weird.
Mhm.
But the writing
Which is
comes
wrong.
easy to. Okay, let's say so. Like for your dad or or his sister, my wife Christy, right? They can stay up. They can do an all nighter and write a perfect paper because it's
Mhm.
easy for them. That's why they can do it.
Yeah. Yeah.
But
No, it's like art
we
for
got
them.
stuck. It's yeah, exactly, exactly.
Yeah.
But well, I think I'm the most. I think the thing that the other thing that I think really another reason why the book Proust and the Squid had a profound effect on me is that I realized that as a teacher, I realized that as a teacher, I was expecting non-dyslexic people to perform like a dyslexic, so I was torturing them.
That's
Right? So
so funny.
I became a tormentor. And I was like, "Oh no." Like no matter who's in charge, whoever the predominant like brain type is,
Yeah.
you're gonna torture the people who aren't that. And I stopped.
Yeah.
That was another reason why it was a book of freedom. I stopped doing that. I stopped expecting
Mhm.
non-creative dyslexic kids to do what I do because they can't do it.
Yeah.
Because I was in
Yeah.
conflict with them. I was in conflict with traditional students. I mean, I still am, but because they want me to give them
At
tasks
least you
that
know
they can
why.
do, and I'm not willing to do it. But I think that,
Uh,
yeah, you bring up a good point that we spend our whole lives trying to live up to the traditional brain wiring around reading and
mhm.
writing, and we can't do that. I think that's for me. That's why we're doing this is to talk to other dyslexics so that other dyslexics who haven't come to this insight or to this realization can get there faster because the faster they
Yeah.
can get there, the faster they can drop the anxiety and the torture.
Yeah.
They
Yeah.
can find their way faster because then they can go, oh wait, I can't do it that way. I'm never going to be able to do it that way. I can drop it. I can drop it.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
And
And also like even if you're in a situation like school where you have to conform if you want to get a good
yes,
GPA or whatever, do good in
yeah,
the conventional way, but in the way you have to do good, like, you still understand that this is just you conforming to some arbitrary rules that don't matter, but you
exactly.
have to,
Yep.
punch the ticket, right? You still have to punch the ticket, but it doesn't mean that you're profoundly wrong or,
No,
profoundly broken.
no,
Yeah.
no, no. You're not at all. You Yeah, so it's a tricky spot, right? It's a tricky spot. And I
Mhm.
think that's why our conversation's unique because I don't know about you, but every time I read about dyslexia, it's always from like, oh, how can we do it better, right? It's never
Yeah.
dyslexics
Yeah.
talking to dyslexics. It's always like, how do we figure this out? And it's like, well,
Yeah.
you and I have already figured it out. We can explain it better than, like, I know I love the brain science. I love the research. I think it's interesting, but it doesn't necessarily get to the dyslexic
Mhm.
because the
Mhm.
system is
Mhm.
too slow to do it. But so I wanted to hint at the next episode.
Mhm.
I think we should talk about reading. I think we should talk about reading in our next episode. I was
Mhm.
hot tubbing with your dad this weekend, and he was telling me that when he would sit next to you, when you would read to him, and he's like, she's doing something, but it's not reading. Like, and I was like, wait a minute. Like, I go, wait a minute. He just explained something to me, which was, yeah, I don't read either. Like, I read, but I don't read the words. I read for the content and I
No.
read for the ideas. I can't tell you
Mm,
any of the words that were used when I'm done.
no.
I'm always surprised when I reread books. I'm like, that's what was in the book? Like, because I'm just
Right?
reading for the ideas.
Yeah. Also, I've found this thing where I can gloss over words mentally. Like, I do not actually read them. And, like, I don't even have a
Yeah.
concept in my brain of what the word sounds like, but I know what it means for the book.
Yes.
And I cannot
Yes.
explain this to non dyslexic people. But, like, I don't know what the word is. I don't know how to say it. I don't even really know what the letters
Yeah.
are in it. I just know it's a chunk of letters that sort of look the same
Yeah. It's a
every single
symbol.
time I read it and are in the
Yeah.
same context. So I know what it
Yeah.
means, but I
Yeah.
cannot ever tell you what the word is. And like
No,
that
no,
is not a
I
common
realized I
phenomenon.
don't read. Yeah.
Yeah.
I
No,
don't
you don't
read.
read.
No, I'm not reading. I'm just looking for the ideas because based on the symbols,
Yep.
like you said, like you said, the way that they're strung together is a pattern
Yeah.
that's
Yeah.
similar to the way it's been done before. But hey, but that said, and we could end on this maybe.
Mhm.
I'm next to Christy, your Aunt Christy. I am one of the
Mhm.
most voracious readers that I know. My friends who are quote unquote normal don't read. I
Mhm.
love to read. I love,
Yeah.
what I love to read is read about ideas and the concepts and the things that are happening, whether it's a novel or whether it's nonfiction or what have you. I love to read,
Mhm.
and I'm
Mhm.
amazed at how many of my friends in school, in the university, who teach who don't read for
Yeah.
fun.
Yeah.
How crazy is
That's
that?
crazy. I mean, like
How
that
twisted is
is
that?
it. What's going on in like I feel like we are good at reading, but we don't read,
Yes,
right? Like we
yes,
enjoy it, but what we are doing is
yes.
not reading.
It's not reading.
No.
It's like something else. And
It's
but that's
yeah,
what's
it's something
crazy is that
else.
our brains figure it out. I think, okay, that's what I want. That's why I think eventually we have to interview people, because I think,
Yeah.
I mean, maybe the ideal is that we get our brain scanned someday by these people, but the
Yeah.
I want, like, we had to wire our dyslexics do a unique thing. They're wiring their brain differently, but we're wiring it
Mhm.
similar to each other.
Yeah.
And that's what fascinates me.
Yeah.
Like, our
Yeah.
brains are wiring them some similar, because one of the studies, I don't remember the details, but it seems like that different language types like Finnish, German, and Swedish, like, it
Mhm.
creates a different genetic code, so they wire their brains slightly differently than you and I would with English, which is
Interesting.
really fascinating. So I want to meet
That's
Finnish
crazy.
dyslexics. What's that like?
Yeah, well, there are certain languages that are easier to learn to read for dyslexics. And like, why? I don't
Yeah.
understand.
And
Yeah.
I
And
like to think, my other fantasy besides living it with the Neolithic people without reading and writing, is that the Israelites and the
mhm.
Persians, they wrote right to left. That makes more sense to me. I wonder if there wasn't a predominant amount of dyslexics in that culture.
Mhm.
Because think about it,
That's interesting.
Hebrew didn't have vowels. You just had to look at it
Really.
and know what it meant by context.
And that's how we read.
Exactly. So I think they're us. They're one of us.
That's
I've always
crazy.
gotten along with people from Israel. I wonder if that's why. Like, I always get along with Jewish people who read Hebrew or speak Hebrew. Like I don't know why. I've always it's like maybe there are kindred genetic spirits or something.
That's really interesting. That's crazy. Your
So is there
brains are
anything
wired more.
you want to end? Yeah.
Um,
Anything you want to end
no, I
on?
just think this is a great conversation. I think the not
Yes.
actually reading Revelation was like that is so on the nail, and I've never said it like that, but it's so true. We're just not
Yeah.
reading.
I didn't know that until your dad said that, I was like, hey, wait a minute, I do that too. I'm not reading.
Yeah, that's so
I
funny.
think what's
It's
weird is
so funny.
we're just doing the best we can to figure out whatever the frick this thing is.
Yes, yeah. It
All right.
sucks,
Well,
but we got it. Okay.
all right. So I think
Yeah.
our next episode should be on reading.
For sure. For sure.
All right.
Yeah.
All right, Ellie. This was
Sounds
fun.
good. Yeah, this was
Yeah.
fun.
Yeah. We'll talk soon.
Yep. Talk to you soon.
Yep.